Israel is continuing its offensive in Gaza on the eve of negotiations to secure a ceasefire and hostage release deal, against the advice of Donald Trump. The U.S. president says Monday's indirect talks between Hamas and Israel in Egypt will, quote, take days, and that the outcome will be great for Israel. Dozens of Palestinians have been killed in Israeli strikes this weekend.
Israel has continued to pound Gaza, despite calls by U.S. President Donald Trump to stop the bombings. Israel says until the terms of a deal are finalized to secure the release of the 48 hostages still held here, 20 of whom are believed to be alive, there is no ceasefire. In an interview with Euronews, Benjamin Netanyahu said whether or not there is a truce will be up to Hamas.
Well, we accepted the deal. As did all the world. It was President Trump's plan. Hamas says that it accepted the deal. Now the onus is on Hamas. This plan consists of two parts. The first part is releasing all the hostages. Israel makes a tactical withdrawal, stays in Gaza. And then the second part is meant to demilitarize Gaza and disarm Hamas. That will be negotiated. Of course, I can't tell you if Hamas will agree to it. I think that it's possible. I hope it'll happen.
As negotiators from Israel prepare for indirect talks with Hamas in Egypt on ending the war, anxious relatives of hostages are camped outside Benjamin Netanyahu's home in Jerusalem. They're pleading for the return of their loved ones, but not to their government, to U.S. President Donald Trump.
The world must apply maximum pressure on Hamas to commit to this historic opportunity for peace. You've seen the photos, President Trump. The entire nation is behind you. We all want what you've offered us, bringing back all the hostages, ending this war, and creating a better future for our children and for our neighbors' children.
Some here accuse Netanyahu of prolonging the war for personal and political gain and have called him an obstacle to the peace process. The family say they plan to remain outside his home until their relatives are returned under the U.S. proposal now on the table.
Well, now we can speak to Jonathan Panikoff. He's the director of the Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative at the Atlantic Council, which is a nonpartisan think tank based in Washington, D.C. Welcome to DW. So will these new indirect talks between Israel and Hamas in Egypt finally lead to an end to the Gaza war?
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I think there's more optimism than we've seen at any point, frankly, than in the last 6 months, maybe a little bit more. I think the pressure that we've seen Arab states put on Hamas, the pressure that we've seen President Trump put on Netanyahu, has created a situation that it's created a real possibility that, yes, you could see a breakthrough. I think most sides want the war to end. Certainly everybody in the Arab world, most of the European countries, even the U.S., Donald Trump wants the war to end. And so I think we're getting there, but there's a number of questions left to be answered, including Hamas's disarmament, sequencing, IDF withdrawal. So the next 48 to 72 hours are going to be quite critical.
Right. Well, you mentioned a few of the sticking points, including that Hamas will not have any role in governing Gaza in the future. That's part of Donald Trump's 20-point peace plan. But is Hamas likely to go along with this?
I think that one may have an easier possibility of going through than some of the others. For Hamas, there are models out there that they'll look at and say, look, if we can somehow keep a presence in the Gaza Strip, and especially a presence in which we're not obligated to disarm fully, or we can sneak weapons back in, then it can almost have a Hezbollah-like model, which gave Hezbollah for years, frankly, a veto power without any of the responsibility of governance. That is exactly what Israel fears the most and is desperate to avoid, is having that type of situation arise again. And so I think the question now of, okay, Hamas members that don't agree to lay down their arms, will the international security forces called for by the Trump peace plan be responsible for disarming them? Will the Israelis be responsible? How does this go forward? Those questions are where this is really going to turn over the long term to determine whether or not a ceasefire is successful.
Well, President Trump is urging Hamas to act quickly, but how fast could the hostages, for example, be released under the current conditions in Gaza?
It's a real question that I think is not fully knowable. The problem is, hostages are almost certainly spread out. Hamas has learned from previous mistakes. It's unlikely that they're all clustered even in the same area. That's the living hostages. You also have a number of the deceased hostages among the 48, and those hostages are also going to be buried and spread out in various places. Hamas has to recover them. And there's a third part to this, which is Hamas doesn't actually control all of the hostages, the majority certainly, but there are other Salafist groups, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, for instance, which are operating in Gaza, which took place as part of the October 7th terrorist attack, who also have had a couple of hostages, and Hamas has to get those back as well. So it's going to take probably more than the 48 or 72 hours President Trump was hoping for. But Israel is determined, and I think the U.S. is determined not to let Hamas simply use this as a delay tactic by saying it's going to take weeks, for instance. That, I think, would be a recipe for disaster and likely ensure that the ceasefire doesn't go through or doesn't hold.
I'd like to ask you about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, because he has been accused in the past of sabotaging hostage deals. So why would this time be different?
I think there's two factors at work. One is the regional situation has changed quite a significant amount. The Israeli attack on Qatar a couple of weeks ago was a real strategic mistake for Israel. It galvanized and unified not just the Gulf states, but the Arab states in a way that behind the scenes, they really hadn't been. That put significant pressure in turn, not only on Israel, but it engendered President Trump to really make another step, use it as an opening, and put pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu as well. We've seen that start to come to bear. The second part is the political situation in Israel is starting to change. A year ago, Netanyahu still wanted to remain in power for 2 years. But now elections have to come by October of next year. Almost nobody thinks a budget will be passed, which has to be passed in Israel in March, which means the cabinet would fall and then you'd have elections by minimum June. I think that means that even if the ultra-nationalists, the right-wingers, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, others in the Israeli cabinet made the decision that they were going to pull out of the government and not support the ceasefire, others, such as Lapid and Gantz and other centrists and center-right members, would be willing to fill the gap solely as a means to ensure that ceasefire goes through. And while it may mean the end of the current government, Netanyahu will be okay with that in a way he wouldn't have been a year ago, because he has to go to election soon anyway.
That was Jonathan Panikoff, director of the Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative at the Atlantic Council. Many thanks for all of your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We now can speak to DW correspondent Tania Krämer, who joins us from Jerusalem. Tania, good to see you. So we just heard the U.S. Secretary of State there, Marco Rubio, saying that for this ceasefire deal to be finalized, Israel needs to stop bombing Gaza. But has the Israeli military been complying?
Well, what we're hearing from eyewitnesses and also from the emergency service, the civil defense in Gaza, that bombardment is still ongoing. It might be a bit less intense. That is what some people in Gaza have told us, but still these strikes are deadly. And the civil defense has said over the course of the past 24 hours, there were dozens of people were killed, among them also children, and many people were injured, and also of course, homes destroyed. And we should not forget hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced from Gaza City, trying to get away from the area. Now, we also have heard that some of the tanks and military vehicles have somewhat, artillery has somewhat withdrawn to certain areas, but this is also far from a withdrawal, which is one of the contentious points of this plan. Now, what we're hearing from the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is that basically what he's concerned about is that Hamas needs to have the time to basically locate the hostages, the living and the dead, and also to recover the bodies. And that is, of course, not possible if the fighting is going on, especially, for example, if those drones, the surveillance drones, are there over Gaza, because Hamas also has reportedly asked that this stops because they don't want to be attacked. So this is the main concern for the Americans, but of course for Gazans, it remains a really dangerous situation.
And Tania, we saw again in Tel Aviv last night, thousands of people rallying, calling for this hostage deal. How much real hope is there right now in Israel that an agreement is in fact close and that the hostages could finally be freed?
Well, I mean, there is this hope, but this hope has been dashed many times before. We've been talking to people last night. They really hope that Netanyahu will pull through with this deal. The same for Hamas, also people in Gaza. Who are living in this daily war, they are also hoping that the war comes to an end. But obviously right now the focus is on those negotiations. We understand that an Israeli delegation will be in Egypt tomorrow, as well as the government in Cairo confirmed that a Hamas delegation will be there, and also the White House has sent their special envoys, and they will have to hammer out those details for this agreement to basically happen. And there are many contentious points, such as the withdrawal of the Israeli military, to which points it will withdraw, the disarmament of Hamas, and many other points I think we've been talking about. So the timeline of all of this, obviously. So a lot of things can go wrong. There is some cautious optimism that all sides want to get this agreement done, but we just have to wait and see for the next few days.
That was DW's Tania Krämer speaking to us from Jerusalem. Tania, as always, thank you.